Andrew Pitcher, welcome back to the Preconstruction podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
I say welcome back because Andrew has got that much knowledge that we had to break his episode into two parts. If you haven't listened to the part one, I highly recommend you go back and listen to it. We'll actually put it in the show notes in case anyone's missed it, because it was a great foundation of what we're going to talk about today. We talked about Andrew's education, his Master of Science in Data Analytics, how to extract, organize, and display data, and then the key data points general contractors should be tracking. And then we talked about the likes of images and videos. How do we get data from that? And then what does the long-term success look like for a scalable data stack? So that's what we discussed last time. This time it's going to be into two topics. So listen up. If you want to hear about these two topics, stay tuned. The first one is not many people will know, but Andrew was presenting recently at Advancing Data Analytics, and his topic covered his own custom cost forecasting tool and how it connects to their database. And then I want to follow up that with questions about. We all know that once data is handed off, that transition from pre-construction and estimating handed off to project execution, when it's handed off, is there any stuff that gets missing or mislaid or miscommunicated? And then after the project is delivered, or even during the process of delivery, does the data flow back up so that you can capture it and make sure that the same mistakes don't happen? So lots to get through, and we're going to get started right away. So Andrew, talk to us about your recent presentation at Advancing Data Analytics. Talk to us about how your custom tool came about.
All right. It's actually project controls. I think Advancing Data Analytics is coming up soon in April.
Yeah.
That's a great conference. I've been there several times, presented at it several times, and I love it. Lots of great information there, lots of great networking. So if you haven't been, definitely go. It's put on by Hanson Wade. All of their conferences are really top notch. So shout out to them. But yeah, so we have a custom cost forecasting tool that's built in Excel of all things. What we really wanted to do, and kind of one of the things that I was hired here for, is to standardize cost forecasting. One of the things that we really press is fanatical consistency in process and execution, so that our clients can always expect a very specific, like Bartlett Cocke product, and interactions with us, and no matter who we put on a project team, that we're always executing the same and at a very high level. Cost forecasting is just a part of that. So we didn't have a very good standardized, consistent process for it, and that's something that we wanted to do. One of the hardest parts of cost forecasting, though, is developing cost curves and making sure that you're accurately forecasting a subcontract or a full contract. The math behind it can be a little complicated. It can be done in Excel. It can be done in a lot of different things. But that's kind of what I was brought in for. And there's a lot of things that go into this tool. For one, we wanted to bring in live data. We wanted to bring in things from our CMIC back end. So we're not having to key in a lot of budget data or cost data or anything else. We don't want people copying and pasting. We want to make it as easy as possible.
Just
So
on
right
that,
now,
Andrew, the CMIC, can you explain that a little bit for anybody who doesn't know what that is?
got it. CMIC is just it's an ERP system for construction companies. So it does anything and everything. So it's basically like a Prolog, a Procore, Viewpoint, any of those. It does project management, accounting, human resources, anything and everything it does. So it's a full ERP. It's a full system. We don't have to have a lot of middleware integrations or anything else between like project management and accounting or HR. It handles all of that. So we wanted to take all that information from the back end of that and be able to use that in spreadsheets and other things, which is actually, to get it out is pretty easy. We started out with an ODBC connection, or open database connection, out of Excel, as kind of a proof of concept. We can run queries onto the database, bring it into Excel, format it, push it into a spreadsheet and make it very usable. Um, Problem with that is it takes a lot of management to keep that secure, and a lot of those queries have to be stored within the sheet or somewhere else. Um, and we weren't really happy with that level of security. And you can tweak those queries if you know what you're doing and if you're savvy enough. So what we ended up doing is once we had established kind of a proof of concept, does this work? Is the user experience good? Is it simple enough but effective enough? We took all of that and then we kind of buried it behind an API layer. So we got a middleware or what's called an iPaaS or integration platform as a service called MuleSoft. And that acts as an API layer. So instead of sending a connection request to our database over our network, we can hit a public API and just send it a request, authenticate, and all the queries, all the data, everything else is secured behind that. So the only thing that you have access to is what you can authenticate for as a user and what will come out of that API. So it's fully standardized, it's very secure, and it handles all of that for us. So right now, this spreadsheet has effectively 5 buttons, and that's really all you need to know how to use. There are 3 columns that you enter in data for, and that's all you need to know. So you need to give all of your activities a start date, an end date, and a distribution type. So do you want to calculate cost weekly or monthly? Do you want to use a cost curve? And then do you want to maybe do a manual forecast? So you can plug in your numbers wherever you want. It's backwards compatible with previous versions. So if we add new functionality or fix a bug or something, we can send it out. All you've got to do is import your previous sheet. And there's a button for that in setup. Go grab your previous one and it'll bring in all your information, all your settings. So everything that you've done for your forecast, it'll redo all of that for you. So it's very scalable. It's very easy to use. Project managers seem to really enjoy it. We're starting to judge the accuracy of it. One of the last functionality pieces that we put into it is taking those forecasts and then pushing them back into our data warehouse. And again, that's going through that API layer. So you click a button, it'll collect all your forecasts, it'll format it, send it to the API. API writes it into the warehouse. And from there, we can grab all of your forecasts. So every forecast that you've saved every month and aggregate those within Power BI. So we can compare forecast to forecast. You can establish a baseline. And we can effectively use all of that information to gauge, are our forecasts good? Are they accurate? How are we doing versus actuals? Is our initial baseline a good baseline? And when do these things maybe become reliable? Because a lot of things can change initially on a project. So there's a lot of good data and information there that we're starting to glean from that. We can also take those forecasts and we can aggregate those across business units. So all of our regional managers can aggregate their regions. So when they're asked, hey, where are you going to be at year's end? They can aggregate all of that, get the forecast together for their work in place, and boom, they're done. So they're not having to call around and ask people and make sure that their forecast is done correctly, and ask questions. What's included, what's not included? Have you considered this? No, that's all done in a standardized, consistent way. So when they're looking at numbers, they know what went into it. They know how it was done. If they do have any questions on details, they can just open somebody's sheet, look at it, and they know exactly where to go every time. So it reduces a lot of ambiguity, and it makes things just much more streamlined process-wise, and they can turn those numbers in quick. If accounting's got questions on it, they can also go into that information and see, hey, here are all the different cost curves. Here's where people are at. Are we happy with this? So that entire process of cost forecasting, creating WIP reports, it's just a lot easier than it has been in the past. It's a lot more streamlined, and there's a lot more insight into it. And there's a lot more to get out of it as well.
And it's interesting, you mentioned standardization a lot, Andrew. Was that one of the hardest things when you come into Bartlett Cocke to be able to sit down with everyone, the stakeholders, and say, right, what is the standardization going to look like? How difficult was that to be able, and how long did that take?
It wasn't a very difficult process. It did take a little bit because I was brought in to kind of help with this project. It was something that had kind of been an idea that had gotten started, but understanding some of the functionality and the technical capabilities and how to actually execute it wasn't something that we had in house at the time. I knew our VP of Strategy and Innovation, I think that's his title, um, through a lot of AGC networking and other things. And we had actually taught a BIM class together many years ago. And he kind of knew some of my capabilities and what I could do. And he said, "Hey, we've got this project that we're working on, and we're going to make a position for this because we really want to take this to the next level. Would you be interested?" So I said, "Yeah," and that's what I got brought on for. And I came in and helped execute it. But it took me a little bit to understand the company, understand how things were done, why they were the way they were, and really get plugged in. But with Bartlett, there was already a focus on making things consistent and standardized. That's something that had already been kind of hammered in by the executives. But then going out and executing it and doing it and providing the tools to make that a reality took a little bit just to get it developed and kind of come to a meeting of the minds and make that happen. So yeah, it didn't take super long, probably maybe 3 to 6 months. A big part of that was just development and getting a product out the door for people to start testing and say, "Hey, this is right, this is wrong. We think it should be done this way or that way," and then really start honing in on a final product. And we've kind of pushed this out in increments. So we had kind of an MVP, minimum viable product of something that would work. It would do what it needed to do, but it wasn't fully functional yet. But it did get a really good amount of feedback. It got usage, it got adoption, and people saw, "Hey, this is great. It saves me a lot of time. It's easy to set up. I don't have to do all of this extra work. I like this." And then so when we start pushing out more updates and more functionality, they're not having to learn this complex, complicated tool. It's just a little bit of extra onto what they already know. And so the tool now is a lot more complex. There's a lot more stuff in it and things that you can do with it than what we had initially put out. But getting to that level and kind of going through those baby steps made it very easy to digest and push out and push adoption for.
Was that the key to success for the uptake and adoption? Was that just giving them a little bit at the start? Because too many of these tools and the feedback I get for pre-con managers and estimators and project engineers or pre-construction engineers is they just land me with this tool and there's a whole host of stuff. And what happens? They only end up using 5% of the actual tool. But your idea was to give them a little bit first just to test it and then slowly but surely introduce them to the rest of the tool.
Yeah. Um, give them something that's useful, something that they can actually do something with, and then keep that pushing more and more and more, and get them used to it first. Like if you push out a software tool and it's got dozens of buttons and functions and all this other stuff, it's really hard to get into something like that and learn it, become a subject matter expert, and really get into it. You have to go into it with a goal of why you're using it, how you're going to use it, and kind of a use case. And you have to go into it with intentionality. You can't just go into it like, "Hey, I've got this tool. What do I use it for now? Like, what do I do with it?" You need a use case and an intention to actually start learning it, to drive yourself to do it. And then from there, find more stuff that you can do with it, and then get really, really deep into how it works, why it works, what it's doing, and how you can really start pushing the envelope. And that's something that I started out with in BIM when I was in college. Was I started learning Revit for a class. Because when I got into this BIM class, I was not a technology person. I was not someone who was really big into computers. It was just like another class of like, "Hey, this is going to be important in the industry coming up." This is 15, 20 years ago now. Maybe not 20, but it was a while. And I kind of started learning little tidbits about it and kind of how to do small things. Like, here's how you set up a sheet. Here's how you draw a floor or a wall. And I kept getting further and further into it. And a lot of it had to do with projects that I was given, like, hey, do this thing, do this. And eventually we were given a set of plans and it was like, hey, go make this building in Revit. Um, so I did, and there were a lot of different architectural features and things in there that were very specialized. And so I started having to learn lots of very like esoteric details of how to use Revit. Um, I was having to make cabinets over and over and over again, so I got tired of it. And eventually, I just made some parametric cabinets that I could just drag and drop across, and they would adjust and do everything that I needed to do, and I could control all their properties. And I got really, really good at it. Turns out that's how I got my first job. Was I asked a lot of questions to the right people who came to give a presentation to our class, and they said, "Hey, come talk to us at Career Fair because you
Yeah.
really seem to know what you're doing." But it was very intentional. It was I had a purpose to go learn something and use it, and I kept getting more and more intentional projects that kind of led me down this path, becoming kind of a super user at the time. But it's not something like if you had given me Revit and said, "Hey, go learn this," I never would have done any of that because there's no intention behind it. There's no path. There's no anything else. So for anyone else, if you're learning a new piece of software, or if you're trying to push one out, you have to have a reason to do it and a project to use it on and a very specific purpose for that project. Otherwise, people are going to look at it as a shiny new tool that has no use, and they're going to go back to what they know and what they know is useful.
Yeah, and it's the biggest problem. I mean, I interview all the people all the time, and adoption is a huge thing. And I think that's a great lesson. It's a small, small drip feeding them initially. Now it kind of brings me back to what you were talking about the Revit, and you're kind of falling into technology and really enjoying it. When you're with Bartlett Cocke, right? And they're lucky to have someone like you, obviously. So they had this idea, right?
Thanks.
Imagine, why could they not have gone out and bought something off the shelf? Why did it have to be customizable? What was the thought process behind that when you were speaking with your seniors?
I don't know. I'm not sure if there really is anything off the shelf at this point that kind of does what we wanted it to. It is really nice to be able to own something and customize it though. Like if you use any SaaS software, you're kind of stuck with someone's idea of what a workflow should be and how you should be doing your business. When you can customize things and you can really dig deep into something, you're customizing that to how you think a project should be executed or how you think pre-con should be executed or estimating should be done. You adopt it to your business instead of the other way around. And I think that's like kind of that's a very important thing for a company to understand and to do is that you are the best person to understand how your business works, why you do things the way you do, and how that sets you apart from everyone else, and how that makes you different.
And it's that whole
So
change thing and adoption thing. I mean, if you're used to doing something a certain way and you get a tool that complements that, then it's easy adoption. But if you get a tool that basically is completely different to the way you run pre-construction or estimating or your workflows, then it's much more difficult.
yeah, it becomes a whole different kind of change where you're not just learning a piece of software and a tool, you're having to change processes and people, and sometimes there can be cultural changes there. And those are systemic changes, and those are very, very difficult to execute.
Yeah, no question. This kind of now nicely brings me to the last point. Well, not the last point, but the other big topic that I want to discuss is that transition from pre-con to operations. You've mentioned it there previously as well, how this tool is easily used by project managers. How then does that information, does that mean that the transition or the handover to project execution is much easier? And then is the information put back upstream to make sure that you don't make the same mistakes within the estimate on the next project?
So this is something that we'll use throughout the life cycle of a project. Like they're constantly forecasting their work in place and where they're going to be at. So every month they're bringing in their budget and they're their cost to date, and they're mapping out their remaining cost of work. And that's their cost forecast. They are still like at the beginning of a job forecasting out, hey, when are these costs going to hit? What is this going to look like? We do have a specific, and I actually made this last month, kind of not exactly on a whim, but on a request of, hey, I need something that's a lot more general than this, or something where a budget doesn't exist yet. So we built a cost curve calculator that can take any number of months, any project type, any project size, and kind of map it to very customizable cost curves. So you can add in specific line items, you can phase work, you can do all sorts of stuff with it. And it's a very flexible tool to do exactly that in pre-con. So you can talk with an owner and say, hey, here's what we think this is going to look like. Here are typical monthly billings for kind of how you want to lay this out and how we think this is going to go. Is that good? You know, does that match up with everything that you want to see? Whether I guess like you're capable of financing or funding. So that's another extra tool in terms of getting things back from pre-con into project back into pre-con. Man, if you can solve that issue, you will be a very rich man. Yeah, you will be retired very quickly. I think that's an issue that everyone has. It's definitely something that I've looked at before. It's something that is also a very manual process. Even with us, it's something where you've got to have a sit down after a job and kind of do an after action review of, you know, what went right, what went wrong, you know, how did our costs change from our estimate, and really look at things manually to make sure that that's captured. I like to capture everything through process and make sure that things are documented so I can see, hey, this changed, why, when, what happened, just as a manner of executing your job. You know, like Amazon does a lot of their clickstream data, so they look at something called data exhaust. And so like as you're going through their website and just interacting with it, you know, you're gonna hover on a web page, you're gonna click stuff, your mouse is gonna hover, you're gonna scroll. And that's really what they're looking at. It's all of this stuff that gets recorded through your interaction. So just you doing something on their website, that's how they're using your data, and kind of figuring out what to sell you and how to recommend things to you and like what you're going to buy. But you're not having to input anything. You're not having to actually go through extra motions to do that. It's just the stuff that's collected through the nature of you interacting with their website. For construction, it's kind of the same thing. Like we look at, you know, you could consider data exhaust as just the stuff of you doing your normal everyday day-to-day job. You know, you do change orders, you do RFIs, you do submittals, and we can look at, you know, when was this submittal executed, or when was this submittal approved, when was it submitted, when was this RFI submitted, when was this budget created, when did changes happen, what changes happened. And we can look at all of the things that you just normally do as a matter of doing your job, and we can understand a lot of things about a project. That's a lot harder to do with pre-con to execution back to pre-con, because you're looking at very different things that those two departments are tracking. Like pre-con is very focused on dollars per square foot. Typically, you're a lot more detailed. Flooring is how I always like to think of this. Like if you're looking at VCT or terrazzo or polished concrete, those are all very different things with very different costs. You have different square footages across a project. The project manager, he only cares about the flooring cost. What is the cost of the subcontract? How much are they billing this month? And where are they complete in what areas? He doesn't care like necessarily what they did in terms of terrazzo or polished concrete or VCT or any of those. He just cares about the dollars going in place. And when it goes back to giving that back to pre-con, he says, all right, well, here's the cost curve for the flooring subcontract. And pre-con says, well, that's great, but how much did terrazzo actually cost? You know, how much did polished concrete actually cost us? And those numbers can get lost in the wash, because if there's change orders or anything else that change quantities and like everything else, that may or may not get captured. You may get a change order that says, hey, change this terrazzo to polished concrete or vice versa. Well, how much was that? How many square feet was that? What was the change? Was there a huge markup on that change order because it's a change order? And if we bid this again, in our next job in 3 months or something, what number should we be using? Well, there's a lot of ambiguity there, and it's really hard to tease that out and get that out process wise. Because unless project managers are tracking things in the same way that pre-con is, which is a very difficult thing to do because it introduces a lot of extra layers on the management process. It's very hard to get those numbers out because once they exit pre-con, they're getting rolled up into larger numbers, and it's really hard to unroll those and get that information out.
Yeah, it's a really difficult thing. I mean, the cost modeling tool is probably as good as you're going to get when you're talking about, but again, it doesn't tell you the true story of maybe the really experienced project manager made a decision in doing this rather than this, and then the next project you hand it to a little bit more less experienced project manager, and they just do not know what to do and they haven't got that knowledge. So
Yeah,
that's tough.
there's there's a lot of other factors in it too. So sometimes it's really hard to tell, what drove what cost, and how you should estimate things and how you shouldn't. Um, and that's why estimators are so necessary, and why good uh, good pre-com people are so necessary is because they have a lot of institutional knowledge. They have a lot of things that you can't pick up in data, or at least the data that we have is too small to pick up on a lot of those things. They also have wide-ranging industry experience, so it's not just your company typically that they have experience at. It's everywhere else that they've been. Because we don't live in an age when people spend 30 or 40 years at the same place. People bounce around, and there's a lot more diverse knowledge for an estimator than you can get out of your own company data. So there's just a lot of things that they will instinctively know and that they can judge, that the typical software can't. And they're not going to be able to pick up on. And like they're going to know individual project managers. They're going to know the people that they're putting on to a project. They're going to know the owner. They're going to know a lot of things that you just can't pick up anywhere else. Like you're going to have a piece of software that's going to say, hey, you've got this, inexperienced APM or PM, so you should estimate this way or something else. Like assuming you have this really smart piece of software, but that estimator can say, no, that guy's really good. We had him as an intern, and he blew everyone away, and we can treat him differently. We can give him more responsibility. This guy's maybe on the C team, and he's a little less consistent, and maybe he needs more training. He's not quite at that level yet, even though maybe he's a PM or something else. And maybe you need to estimate his capabilities differently. So there's a lot of things in there where estimators, they just know more than something that software can tell you. And because a lot of times they're just operating off of more information.
But that's the beauty of technology. Like that is the beauty. What you just described there of estimators making those sort of high level decisions and conversations. That is what we need estimators doing, rather than being stuck on spreadsheets, looking at Excel sheets, looking for data, historical data. And it interests me, right? And I'm sure pre-construction managers and estimators will be listening to this. What data points did you pick on when you started this tool? Because it sounds so simple, but the information that the cost modeling tool, it sounds as if the data points, that it doesn't take a lot of time to do that from the project management point of view and the estimating point of view. So what ones did you concentrate on essentially?
Mainly budget, cost, and historical costs on different jobs. One of the things that we have on our we have it on our pre-con report, and there's a project cost analysis report that we have in Power BI, where we normalize project costs. So in normalization, when you're talking about data science, is you can take things that are at different scales or different timelines, and you normalize them to the same kind of the same parameters. So what we do is we look at percentage of cost and percentage of time on projects. We can map out a cost curve that way instead of looking at overall timeline and overall cost. Because if you want to look at an 18-month job versus a 24-month job, and one's 20 million, the other is like 89 million, it's really hard to make cost curve comparisons between that. But when you start normalizing it, they start to look the same, and you can make comparisons between them. So when we look at all the different jobs that we've ever had, we can compare them kind of on the same scales. And we did that down to a division level, a regional level, and I think like a market level. So we can pick and choose whatever we want for all these jobs and say, all right, well, electrical on an elementary school should look like this on this kind of time frame and this cost curve, based on all the electrical that we've ever done on elementary schools. So we can start plugging that information in and validating it and making sure, like, okay, are we in the right ballpark? Are we doing good or not? Yes. All right. So that's kind of how we arrived at some of that. The rest of it is just getting out information that you're going to need regardless. So stuff like budget. You know what a subcontract is going to cost you because it's a subcontract, but you don't want to have to look up that information, plug it in, rekey it every time there's a change order. So a lot of the usefulness in it is not just the data points, but just the automation of taking those menial everyday tasks that are super repetitive and don't require a whole lot of thought. They just require time. Putting those in an automation, making it easy to do, and getting the PM 95% of the way there, and then letting him take his experience, his knowledge, and everything that he knows about the project, and taking it the rest of it, like that extra 5%. Because that is something that
that's the beauty of it, Andrew. And I'm just thinking, like, if you were able to get a cost, and I don't know the exact numbers, but if you were able to get it within 3 to 5%, even 7%, and that's a great starting point to start talking to the client and start talking to the subcontractor, rather than spending maybe 6-7 hours doing the small details and the small quantities of each item for the electrical package. So is that the real value?
Yeah, and I think that's the real value of most software. Whether it's something custom built, whether it's something that you buy off the shelf, is it should be getting you really close. It should be automating a lot of the just really menial things that anyone can, like, you could have an intern do it, because it's really easy and repetitive. It should be getting you there. It should be getting you set up, and to a point where the only thing missing is your institutional knowledge of your organization, your knowledge of the project, and your experience, and taking those things and kind of massaging those numbers and making sure that they look good to you. And then you can have that conversation. Like, software should be a time savings tool. It shouldn't be something that replaces you or your knowledge or your experience. It should be something that gets you there and automates all of the busy work, so you can actually do the real hard thinking and the hard work that actually takes a brain.
Yeah. And that's where general contractors are at. The general contractors that understand the value of it, and they understand the pressure and the time constraints that estimators and pre-construction managers are under, by not giving them a good technology tool, whether it be off the shelf or customized, then they're just putting them on, leaving them in the pressure cooker. And we're seeing that across the board. Big boys, mid-sized GCs, and small GCs. And unless they get on board with this, then they're going to lose people and they're going to lose projects.
Yeah, it should never be something where you get a piece of software or a tool or something else, and you think that it's going to spit out numbers that you can just use, and you have users who are just, here, you're a tool operator now. You're not an experienced knowledge worker. You're just driving the skid steer.
That's a robot. That's a robot you're talking about there.
Yeah, that should never be the case, because the people running that tool are the ones who are really doing all of the really tough work. And I think that's like an AI trap. Like right now, like you can ask ChatGPT or Gemini or all these other LLMs for a lot of things, and they'll give it to you. And they'll be very, very confident in what they're giving to you. And you can ask them like, hey, how confident are you about this? Absolutely sure. Um, but what they're spitting out is just a regurgitation. It's a pattern that it's detected in data, and it may or may not be correct. It may or may not be true. Like there's a challenge um, to get LLMs to deliver a picture of a glass of wine that's full to the brim, and it is exceedingly difficult because of how AIs work and how they're trained. And you can put in prompts and you can ask it for this all day long, and it's going to give you a glass that's half full or like maybe three-quarters full is the best I've ever really done. But to the brim, almost overflowing, but not quite, is exceedingly difficult for AIs to draw. And the reason is there just aren't any pictures of wine that way. So they're
Unless you're
not trained on that. Yeah.
unless you're in my house on a Friday night.
But the thing is, every picture of wine on the internet and every description of those pictures describes a full glass of wine, but the picture is half full. And so that's what it knows, and that's what it's learned as half full. But we know from experience what that looks like and how to interpret that. And you can ask it for that picture and it'll give you the wrong thing. If you ask it how full is that glass of wine, it'll tell you it is full to the brim. It is almost overflowing, but not quite. Because that's what you asked for. And it doesn't know the difference. And most pieces of software and tools are that way. They're not smart enough to understand those little nuances and things, because that is what we as humans bring to the table. Is, we have the experience to understand that. We have the more generalized knowledge. We have the more we're more adaptable to those sorts of problems. And we're not just going to regurgitate something. We can go out and problem solve and understand all the nuances, all the small things about it, and problem solve and understand, here's what's different about this than everything else out there. And we can take little parts and pieces of things and put them together to create something new or something that's a lot more useful than what an AI tool can really deliver.
Andrew, that is an incredible example of why we and how we should be using technology in the estimate and pre-con example. Listen, this has been unbelievable. It's the second episode. I can already sense a third episode because there's about 5 points here that I didn't even get to. But we're going to have to cut it here. Thank you so much for giving up your time. If there is anybody that has listened to this one, listened to the last one, and says, you know what, I like where Andrew's going. He's piqued my interest. I need to speak to this guy. Where's the best place to get you?
You can message me on LinkedIn. I'll typically respond to messages there. Yeah, or you can email me at apitcher@bartlettcocke.com, and those are both good.
Brilliant. Yeah, we like the LinkedIn one. I'll put your LinkedIn profile on the show notes below, folks. So if you're listening on Spotify, on Apple, then I will put it in the show notes and you can reach out to Andrew on LinkedIn. Andrew Pitchker, I'm telling you, this is the second of a 3 or 4 part series. So we'll be in touch soon. And we're really looking forward to following you at Bartlett Cocke and see what you're up to.
All right, awesome. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate you reaching out and having me on, and looking forward to next time.
Stay tuned. Thanks, Andrew.
All right, thanks, Gareth.